Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Vianney Lubis with the Alumni Society. Welcome to our second SocietyCast program. Now, before we get started, I just want to give it a quick minute or two and let everybody log on and get settled in. In the meantime, feel free to start using the chat box here on the right-hand side. I see some of you are already using it, which is great. So yes, let us know where you're joining us from. Say hello and let me know if you can see me and hear me okay. All that good stuff. Hello, Adela, Lucino, good to see you. And Cesar from Miami, very jealous. We have Atlanta, LA, Boston, coast to coast. That's great. Yes, lots of Chicago. Video sounds good. Wonderful. Also, we have a fun poll. I say it's fun because I'd love to hear your answers that we've added to our SocietyCast here today. It's just located at the bottom screen here, just below the video screen. And so if you want to take a quick minute and answer that, let us know what your superpower would be. Would love to see those answers. We'll just give it one more minute before we kick off. Lots of Chicago and San Antonio. Hi, Carlos. How are you? It's good to see a lot of friendly faces on this program today. All right, so it's been a couple of minutes, and I see some people are continuing to log on, but in the meantime, we can get started. All right, so hello again, and welcome for those of you who have just tuned in. My name is Vianney Lubis with the Alumni Society, and I want to officially welcome you to our second installment of SocietyCast. And thank you so much for joining us, for taking time out of your busy days to participate in our second program. I hope you're all continuing to stay safe and healthy in your homes, which is why we're super excited to continue to have this opportunity to bring our networks together digitally. We're all sheltered in place, and so it's important to find ways to come together as a network, as a community, continue to inspire each other and keep that community building. So the goal of SocietyCast, this is our first virtual event series, and it's really meant to help facilitate inspiration and insights and innovation amongst our network, amongst our comunidad. So for those tuning in today live, but also for those who will watch the replay in the future. And so before I introduce you to our speakers today, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items, right, and just give you a quick rundown on how today is going to go. So today's program is a fireside conversation for about 20 minutes, and that will be followed by an interactive Q&A session with all of you. So there's two main ways to submit questions today. There is the Ask a Question feature here located at the bottom of the screen next to the polls section. So you can use that at any time today during the talk. A pro tip is if you have a question that's similar, or you see rather a question that is similar to the one you wanted to ask, feel free to just upvote that question, and it'll kind of rise it to the top and ensure that it gets answered. And in addition, I'll be monitoring the chat box here on the right-hand side, so you can also use that as well. And lastly, if you're using Google Chrome as your web browser for tuning into this, you do have the option to actually come on screen and ask your question directly to the speaker. It works best if you're on Google Chrome. So if you'd like to do that and come on, just let me know via the chat box, and that'll make it a little bit more interactive as well. So let's go ahead and invite our speakers to the screen now. Okay. Hello, Pedro. Hi, Andres. Make sure you're not muted here. So everyone, I want to introduce you to our speakers today. So many of you know Pedro here to the left, our CEO and co-founder, who will be interviewing our featured subject, Andres Idarraga. And so just to give a little bit of background on Andres, he has a story that actually begins in a 6x9 cell in a Rhode Island prison. He's a TEDx speaker and a social entrepreneur who is renowned throughout academic and business circles for having attended both Brown and Yale Law School after having spent spent 6.5 years in prison. But the story of that journey and the story that's inspired Andres to establish his social impact company, Creci, starts decades ago. And so I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that story here today. It's a story of perseverance and purpose. And so we're really honored to have you joining us today, Andres. And with that, Pedro, I'll let you take the stage and I'll come back to assist with Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Vianney. Andres, nice to see you. I guess I'd like to start today by asking you about where you're sheltering in place. What's your life like now? What was it like pre-COVID? And what do you think, what's going to stay the same once we're back to some level of normalcy?
So I'm sheltering in place in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I get to enjoy a little bit of sun in the backyard with my kids. But life has definitely changed before this because of the nature of the business that I'm in, and we're operational in Latin America. We began operations in Colombia. I would travel a lot there. I'm out actually doing an Executive MBA program once a month in your hometown of Chicago, in Northwestern at Kellogg. So I was traveling there a great amount. So, and my wife's a partner at a law firm, so she travels as well. All that obviously has completely stopped. We have the luxury of having family help with our 2 young children, so we could continue working. So work hasn't let up, but now it takes place at home. We try to get up early in the morning. My wife always beats me to the punch. She's a little bit more disciplined than I, but we're continuing to work, and we're hopefully that when we come out of this, I would love to see things return to a sense of normalcy, but a conscious sense of normalcy. When we're thinking about how do we continue to protect ourselves both health-wise, we see some of the actually positive effects on the environment of folks kind of being locked down and a little bit of abatement of pollution. So I would like to see how we think about preserving some of the positive that has happened while alleviating the negative.
And what about like your travel schedule? Do you feel like that's going to go back to what it was, or do you think you'll be a combination of virtual meetings and physical travel?
I think it'll go back to what it was. I feel that we have become accustomed to the virtual meetings, and I think those are going well. But sometimes a personal touch still matters a lot.
Right.
So maybe let me reframe that. Maybe it won't go back maybe to the same level, but something similar.
Right. So the premise behind this conversation is to share your story of perseverance. I think one of the things that many of us are dealing with now is just that, how to persevere, especially if having to stay in one place is new for somebody. Can you tell us about that word, what it means to you, and at what point in your life did that theme first enter your personal narrative?
Mm-hmm. So the way I define perseverance is hard work, doing something that you really don't want to do, or doing it through a difficult time where mentally or physically you feel exhausted. And as a young person growing up with 2 immigrant parents, we had a small low income. We lived in a low income community. We rented, but for some reason, our apartment was, our heaven. So my mother on the weekends would clean it from top to bottom, and she would give me and my brother a little dish rack to clean the tiles one by one. And I would ask my mother, why don't you just mop the floor? Why do you have my brother and I on our hands and knees cleaning this floor tile by tile? And she said, it's because I have you and you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that began to instill kind of the sense of discipline of when you want to do something, you want to do it meticulously, perfectly, and in great detail. At the same time, my immigrant father worked 2 backbreaking shifts at a textile mill. So my father initially came to this country undocumented with very little education, and he taught himself machine mechanics, and he would fix machines at a textile mill. And he worked the night shift and then the first shift. And anytime he was at home, he was basically sleeping. And growing up around this kind of hard work and this meticulousness about how, as something as simple as how you clean the house, really gave us a sense of how to persevere, how to take things very, very seriously, and work hard and work hard through the times where you really don't want to. So I thank both of my parents for that example.
Right. You mentioned in your TEDx video on YouTube that you fell in love with the joy of learning while you were in prison. Did it start there, or did it start before? And what sparked that interest?
Mm-hmm. It started in prison, and I want to give you a little bit of a background how it started there. So because I had been instilled with some hard work and discipline from my family's example, I was good at education, not because I'm talented, but because I did the hard work. I'm willing to learn the first page, turn to the second page, and move forward. So I received good grades, but not particularly because I was in love education. I just found it as I was disciplined about it. And I even received a scholarship to one of the most elite schools in Rhode Island and in the Northeast, the Moses Brown School. For people that don't know it, it's in the same, we played sports and we're in the same league as Phillips Exeter, Andover Academy, St. George's, and other top schools in the Northeast. And even though I understood that academics was bringing me somewhere, it wasn't like I was fully in love with it. And I actually ended up dropping high school for a second, and went on to turn to the streets as a refuge in a way. I ended up in prison. I spent 6.5 years in prison, and during that time, because of it was based on a little bit of a foundation of education that I had. I serendipitously just began going to the library a lot and began to read literature, but I engaged with literature in a different way. I engaged literature in a way where through those stories were holding up a mirror on myself, on my family's sacrifices. And it was telling me something differently that I had ever told me. And I began to really fall in love with reading. And reading led me to become a GED tutor. And when I was tutoring GED, I had students come up to me and say, Andre, you're explaining to me things in a way that I finally get it. I understand it. I understand why they actually be important. And you make me feel like I could do anything with my life. And that really, it made me feel powerful. It made me feel fulfilled. And I began to have this joy with engaging with education for myself, but also motivating those around me to pursue their education.
What was it about your explanation of the literature that elicited that response?
Mm-hmm. So to people, so in the GED tutoring it was literature, it was other subjects, but one of the things that I had developed a talent for was breaking down complex issues into digestible bits. So when you really explain things to folks, and not really the end goal, but how to get there in step-by-step format, and breaking down things into whether it's 10 steps or 100 steps, but really explaining that first step initially, slowly, why it's important. Then once you finish that, go on to the second step. I think folks saw a way to really engage with education that was not intimidating. And for my own self, what literature did was, and I speak about it in my TEDx talk, particularly the Russian writers,
Right.
was give me a psychologist for myself. Russian authors really engage with the psyche and how individuals make decisions, and in a very minute way, where it made me begin to think about myself, how I made my decisions, what context those decisions were made, and allow me to step outside my own circumstances to assess them and to be able to create a game plan for overcoming them.
Oh, that's great. The TED Talk you mentioned, you also had two quotes that really stuck out to me that I thought were really interesting, and I wanted you to maybe speak to them. The first was that you mentioned that prison wasn't foreign to me. It was almost like a homecoming. And then obviously later you went to Yale Law, which is an incredible accomplishment, and you felt like you had made it, that you had arrived. Can you talk about that dichotomy of those two experiences, especially with your life story?
Okay. And before I do, I'll explain what homecoming means to me and what arriving means to me. Homecoming means going to a place that you feel extremely comfortable, that you felt that you're returning to, that almost that you could even be trapped by, and you're still there. And arriving is a place that you're dreaming of, and maybe is the time when you open the door and you enter into this new world of opportunities. So when I went to prison, people from my high school, my community, of a fair amount of them had gone to prison. People in my own family had gone to prison. So when I arrived there, it felt like a place that I was destined to go for some reason. Beginning at age 16 or 17, I was viewing my life, and particularly because what I was doing, I knew that I would go into prison one day. The calculus that I made was, I hope that it wouldn't be longer than 5 years. To me, kind of the 5 years was kind of the litmus test where I really wanted to stay around that number. And when I initially went to an intake center, and then when I was sentenced, I went to a maximum security prison. As soon as I got there, people were saying my name. Hey, Andres, I saw that you were locked up. I knew you were coming here. I know you will make it to this facility, and here we are together, because it was people that I went to junior high or high school with. Arriving at the Yale campus, and that was after Brown. So to me, my Brown admittance letter and my experience at Brown was completely transformational. Brown is a place in Rhode Island that you look at as an Elysian field, that you want to make it there, and it could be transformative. So Brown was completely transformative. But at Brown, I saw people that came from high levels of privilege, high levels of wealth, and some of them were applying either to MBA or law schools. And when you're talking about law schools, these people that came from this utmost privilege talked about Yale Law School in this, reverent way.
Right.
So when I arrived at Yale, I said, wow, even people that started much further along in life than me looked at this place as, this great place, and here I am. And it was a little bit disoriented, but I want to say in a good way. I thought about, what could this really mean long term? And I said, I've arrived because I know with this platform, I should be able to do something meaningful. And if I don't, it is my own fault.
Right. And I want to talk about some of the things that you've done. And, currently, as everyone obviously knows, we're living in a pandemic, but this is also a big election year. And so some of the things that I've read about you is that you're passionate about civic engagement, specifically as it pertains to voting rights. And while you were at Brown, correct me if I'm wrong, you actually worked to change a Rhode Island law that didn't allow you to vote because you're still on parole from a felony conviction. Is that right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And so can you tell us about that effort and also that motivation to have such a strong civic engagement and how important it is, especially now?
Mm-hmm. So civic engagement for me really was two authors and two pillars, two men, historical men. I read Nelson Mandela's A Long Walk to Freedom and a biography on Thurgood Marshall. And they lived in extremely trying circumstances. And they spoke about the importance and the avenues through which we engage civically and how we could transform our civic life to incorporate those that have been marginalized and those that are being excluded. And I thought when I came home, there was a few states around the country that were barring people from voting. And we think about this voting as a fundamental right. And one of those states was Rhode Island. And it really, really surprised me because we think Northeast, somewhat more liberal. And if a person came home from prison, he couldn't vote until he jumped through a number of hoops. And it disenfranchised a large number of people. And in low income, predominantly African American communities that are also brown communities, many Latinos live in there, around 40% of individuals between 18 and 34 were excluded from voting because of these laws. So I thought that was fundamentally unfair. I began to volunteer on a project, grew within the project, got into the leadership basis of it, and we were able to change the state constitution through a voting referendum. Something that recently happened in Florida and re-enfranchised about 1 million new voters, although there's been a huge pushback on it to try to continue to exclude them. So I thought, voting is kind of the primary and fundamental way when you engage. I thought the exclusion process were unfair, and I wanted to be involved in that. I thought it was important that folks like myself that were interested in these issues could speak about them ourselves. We didn't need a mediator involved. We could go out there and lobby, write laws. Actually, the person that wrote part of the referendum or either the law was a fellow prisoner that I was there with. So we were fully involved in this.
That's incredible. And recently you've had a career shift. You started your own company and also a nonprofit. So can you tell us about both? Can you tell us about Creci and about the nonprofit and what made you want to become an entrepreneur?
So a couple of things. One is while I was growing up, my mother, I think of her as my first example of an entrepreneur. She cleaned home. She was a textile worker, but on the side, she sold trinkets. She actually raffled the trinkets, and among other kind of micro entrepreneurial things she did to keep food on the table and the lights on at home. But she would raffle trinkets, and one of the happiest moments at home was when nobody won the trinket and she could re-raffle it or give it to even to one of us and we could enjoy it. So I saw how hard she worked and what the extra income that it brought, how meaningful entrepreneurship could be in low income communities. And then another thing was when I was working on the voting rights campaign, I recall an email that I got from an individual. Right. And he wrote that you come to this country, you break the laws, now you want to vote. Go back to your country with the rest of your filth. And the word filth stood out for me. And I thought about it deeply. I continue to think about it, not in a way that makes me angry, but in a way that I think about the lens that other people are putting on my communities. And I know that those communities are diverse, have really great working people in them. And I wanted to go back to show that we are much more than that. To give whatever helping hand or whatever resources I could put into those micro entrepreneurs, into those folks that may be in prison that want to get an education. So my efforts are concentrated on two things. I have a nonprofit where we provide educational support services to people in prison or transitioning out of prison that want to pursue higher education. And Creci, where we're supporting small businesses, sometimes micro businesses, that are furthering any one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's employing people in distressed areas, water treatment issues, recycling issues. We want to empower those entrepreneurs that are being left out of the stream of the capital markets that are thinking about sustainability. So we've seen this huge growth in sustainable funds, but they go to traditional companies. They go to huge companies that are able to repurpose their image to say we're a sustainable company, and sometimes they are. But none of the stream is going to micro entrepreneurs that are working on the same issues. And I want to work on a mechanism that we divert funds to them.
That's great. That's incredible. I love what you say about your mom's story. And I think, we don't associate the immigrant journey as an entrepreneurial one, but I think that they're very much the same. To step into the unknown, to leave your home and venture forth, there's a lot of similarities between the life of the immigrant and the life of the entrepreneur, but it's incredible what you've shared. So thank you. We have one, I think, last story before question, before we open it up to our audience. And I want to come back to this topic of perseverance. And I wanted to ask you if perhaps you had some advice or a personal mantra or something that you could share that people could take away to perhaps help them persevere, especially in this world that we're currently living in.
Yeah, I love a quote, and I'm not sure exactly where it comes from. It might be something like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett that says, people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they could do in 10 years. And digging down into the details of that quote really means that, to me, as complex as issues that some people in the Alumni Society may be working on, we're kind of professional Latinos, really it boils down to simple mantras. And one of them really is that the exponential rewards of hard work long term. So when you begin to be extremely diligent and work hard on those things that you need to do today, tomorrow, and the next day, sometimes the rewards are hard to see. And the rewards that you plan in that year might not pan out. But at a certain point, there's an inflection. And then you see kind of all that hard work that you did start to have exponential returns. And a lot of times that's very hard for us to see, particularly when you're in low income distressed communities, because sort of your discount rate of future effort is hard to judge because you're living day to day. But starting from a prison cell, where I was getting college applications delivered to me, I was getting FAFSAs delivered to me, and guards were saying, "What is it that you're doing up there?" And I applied to college with the help of a USA Today article that broke down the college application process step by step. Step one, you do this. Step two, you do that. You see that at a certain point, your hard work creates exponential returns. The network that I have today, the resources that I'm able to marshal today, even though they're not where I want them to be yet, they're much more than I could ever dream of. So my mantra really is make sure that alarm clock is set tomorrow early enough that you could do the work that you need to do before your kids wake up. That when your kids wake up, you still are able to create the space where you can be productive while devoting time to family, because these things have your hard work will have exponential returns.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Andres. Thank you for sharing your story and for your leadership. It's an incredible journey that you've taken, and we can't wait to see how much further you're going to go.
My pleasure.
All right, I'm back, and I think it's time to turn it over to audience Q&A. A reminder, if you do want to come on screen to ask your questions, let me know on the chat box, and we can bring you up here. In the meantime, we do have 2 questions, Andres. So why don't we get started on the first? The first is, how can we support your efforts? Jill Ortiz wanted to know.
Okay. So I think we have a call to action here at the bottom of this crowdcast, where we are trying to set up that mechanism where folks can end up supporting the entrepreneurs we're supporting. Right now, we're supporting entrepreneurs that have employed over 60 indigenous folks in Colombia, over 40 farmers. We're treating over 60,000 liters of water on a daily basis. And we want to provide a mechanism where retail folks could go onto our platform and support these entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
If you hit on this link, just sign up. We'll have your contact information that when it goes live, we'll be able to reach out to you. So I think that would be a really great way to start.
Great. And I just saw Nidia just let us know she can't hear us. Can you hear me? Can you hear Andres, our speaker? Let us know. Yes, so Andres, the sign up to support social impact small businesses, that is the link to follow for you. Great, thank you, Andres, for that. The second question, and this is a very interesting question, what do you think is the biggest hurdle the Latino community is facing right now in light of this pandemic? And I'd open it up to both of you if you'd care to answer, Pedro, as well.
You want to go first, Pedro?
I mean, where do we start? Yesterday, we had I think what's interesting, we had a virtual networking happy hour yesterday. And one of the comments that was made was that all of the issues that existed previously are now being magnified. And I don't think there's one single issue. I think, unfortunately for Latinos, it is all of the issues are exponentially there, from health to access to capital, to voting rights, to the stuff that you're passionate about, Andres. It's hard to even pinpoint where to begin. And I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges. It's almost like analysis paralysis on scale. Where do we start? So I don't have a specific answer for that. Andres, what are your thoughts?
I agree that every issue that we face becomes magnified. Myself so let's talk about access to healthcare. I remember my mother was terminally ill and passed away. And because at the time I was still a student, my brother himself hadn't gone on to college at that time. For her to get treatment was so unbelievably hard at that time, because she didn't have insurance and the like. I can only imagine what that issue looks like now. I'm an entrepreneur, and even though my network is big, it is an elite network. Being a Latino entrepreneur and all the issues with fundraising, I know people in the alumni community, the alumni society, are involved in venture capital, things of that nature. You see how Latinos continue at times to be excluded from traditional capital streams and the like. I can only imagine now what type of rigor they're going to continue applying to us. So things become magnified. I agree. I want to speak to something more general that I've always thought about Latino challenges. And it regards a book that I read in prison called Latinos by the sociologist Earl Shores.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a book that really, if I had become interested in education, this book magnified it, 100x. And he spoke, he analyzed immigrant ways, and he came to a conclusion that said, if the first generation or the second generation Latino immigrant, meaning my parents or myself, didn't rise up above their circumstances, the prior generations get stuck in those circumstances almost indefinitely. And I said, oh my God, I'm a second generation, you could debate, maybe I'm first or second. But if I don't make it, my children and their children become just stuck here. And I think about how many people, because of this pandemic, the opportunities for them to overcome their situations have become static, even more static than before. And if they don't rise up above them, how many more generations are going to be stuck there? So, that book was really transformative for me as I thought about my role in getting my family out of the circumstances that we faced at the time.
Can you repeat the name of the book? I'd like to recommend it out to the audience.
It is Latinos by Earl Shorris. EARL Shorris, SHORRIS.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. And we have another question here from Cesar, whom I believe is your brother, Idarraga, also an Alumni Society member. This question comes with a bit of insight considering I'm your brother, but I would like to hear about the most memorable impact you've experienced with TTEF and possibly speak about TTEF itself.
So TTF is the Transcending Through Education Foundation. And I actually founded it when I graduated from law school, before I had started a job. So before I had any money, I reached out to two people that I was in prison with that had gone on to college education. And I said, guys, we got to pay it forward. There's a dreamer in there right now that's thinking about changing his life. How do we begin to do that? So we formed a 501c3. And since 2011, we've awarded about 35 individual scholarships. We team up with community colleges to provide instructions to 20-person classes inside a maximum security prison. And we provide workshops to people applying to college or for federal financial aid with a criminal record. So I just want to give that background on TTEF. And the website is ttef.org. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. And there's two very memorable things. So I was in a maximum security prison, and there was an individual that had been waived out of juvenile for a really tough crime, and he was basically going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And we're active in that prison system. He wrote me a letter a couple of years ago saying, I've seen the impact TTEF is having on people here in prison, and I wanted to make a donation to your nonprofit. And here's a person making about between 50 cents and $3 a day, which is what you made in that prison for working, making about a $50 donation to our foundation. And it really made me emotional at the moment. A person that may never come home and seeing the impact of it. And another one is a more recent letter about an individual that had been had a tough criminal and tough disciplinary record, but his test scoring and his portfolio of educational product, which we ask for when people are applying for our services, was so outstanding that the community decided to give him a scholarship. And the prison actually called us and said that they weren't in full agreement with us supporting that individual because he had been a disciplinary problem inside. But since he got the scholarship, he has turned it around. He's taken paralegal courses. He writes me, he's written us several letters, including one said that nobody really believed in me. And when you gave me the money to pursue this education project that I had, it was so meaningful to me that I vowed that I would make the most of it. And he has. And letters like that make this project extremely worthwhile. I think when you begun, even from prison, when you begin to be accountable to other people because they believed in you, there's a sense of responsibility to do right by them. And I think you see that.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. I put out the website as well for everybody who wants to learn more. All right. So I think we don't seem to have any more questions. So we'll open it up for one more question. Otherwise, we can wrap up. I think that's all the time we have for today.
I have one.
You do?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Andres, to me, it's so striking that when you were a young man, you saw yourself going to prison, right? That you just envisioned and you told yourself no more than 4 years. Where do you see yourself now? Where do you see your future going? And do you focus on that as a way to sort of cultivate that trajectory in some capacity?
Yeah. So, you kind of think about your end of life and what would be the most meaningful things that could happen near your end of life. And I would love to be somewhere where there are a fair number of people, a large number of people, if if I want to be ambitious, that said, I either got my education or we were able to be successful in our business because of structures and work and support systems that I was able to help build.
That's great.
That would be a great way to call it a life. And I do work very hard on it on a day-to-day basis. I think my family sometimes stays away from me because I preach too much about to my younger cousins, and it was like that to my brother. My brother has a terrific story where he took care of my terminally ill mother while I was going to school. And my brother, sometimes I take a little bit of culpability for leaving him wrong when I was young. Later on, when we were older, he got his life together by going to the armed forces. So he was in the military here in the U.S., took care of a terminally ill mother, and had never gone to college. And when I finished college, I said, Caesar, drop everything. I will support you as much as I can for you to go to school. And he started at Miami-Dade Community College and ended up graduating with a master's degree from Columbia University, obviously a top university. And that's the same talk I have with so many people in my circle. Say, okay, so how are you getting your education today? What are we going to do together about it? And things like that. And I think sometimes they even get a little bit sick of me. So I do try to, play that role on a day-to-day basis because I do want to get to that capstone moment at the end of life.
Wow, that's great.
We had one more question come in, so we'll wrap up in just a minute, but let's go ahead and ask this last question. Andres, thank you for sharing your personal narrative. Can you speak a little about your kids and what lessons you're teaching them that you wish someone had told you, especially around perseverance?
So I have a 6-year-old daughter and I have a 3-year-old boy. I'm still struggling with that, quite frankly. We haven't got into, we try to devise certain things where we try to develop what's being called grit nowadays, right? So how do we develop grittiness in young kids? But they're starting to grow up with such privilege that, sometimes it's concerning. They ask for something, they usually get it. And even in this moment of COVID and isolation, they were in the pool all this morning, and I'm struggling with it. How do we begin to develop that grittiness? Because it comes at a certain point where, am I being overly strict and there's no reason to be strict? One of the things that we do set up certain reward systems for a certain amount of efforts. My daughter has taken to it very, very well. My daughter has a talent that neither my wife or I has, which is she's a burgeoning artist and is able to just draw and color and do these amazing works of art for hours on end. And she's kind of transferring that discipline into other areas. My boy is 3 years old at the moment, so he's just wild. But I do think I still have a lot of family that lives in fairly, very modest and very distressed ways. And we go back to those places in Colombia. I want to open up their eyes to them. Sometimes I think about going back to live there to show them a different, our original culture and how we've evolved, to see if I develop an appreciation for the opportunities they have, because I want them to take full advantage of the opportunities. And I'll end with I want to end this comment with a quote from the dean of Yale Law School, which is very meaningful to me, and I think about it often. And he talks about deserving your opportunities. And he talks about when he finished law school, he received a clerkship on the U.S. Supreme Court, and he called his father, and he said, "Pops, I'm clerking on the U.S. Supreme Court. Do I deserve this?" And his father answered and said, "Of course you don't. You absolutely do not deserve this. But it is what you do with the opportunities that you don't deserve that'll determine whether you deserve them in the first place." And that's a lesson that I want to give my kids when it's appropriate. There's a lot of things you have. You really don't deserve them, because none of us deserve, being so comfortable that you don't have to think about where your next meal comes from, or other things like that. So I want them to live a life of meaning, of purpose, or pursue their passion in a way that it does credit to the opportunities that they have that they maybe didn't deserve initially.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Andres. This has been a true pleasure. Pedro, thank you so much for your time. And to all who asked questions, thank you. And thank you for joining. So if you want just a couple things before we wrap up, if you want to see this again, you may. The replay will be available. If you want to share it with your networks, you can do so. And also, we love your feedback. As we're just starting these, it'd be great to sort of hear what topics you'd like to hear about and what you thought of today's discussion. So please do share that through a survey that we'll be sending out shortly. And before we go, the next will be in 2 weeks, April 30th. We will be featuring human strategist and workplace culture expert Daisy Olger Dominguez, and she's going to be talking about how to be a better leader during crisis. So I hope you'll join us. And again, thank you both so much for your time. This was excellent. And thank you all for joining, and we'll see you soon. Stay healthy out there.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Andres.
Pleasure.
Yeah.